Hi, this is Scott Miller. Welcome to my Top Performance blog. I have the distinct pleasure of speaking to two people whose work I've really come to value over the last couple of years. They are podcasters, and their podcast is called Very Bad Therapy. Hello, Ben. Hello, Carrie.
Hi, Scott.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having us.
Thanks comes from me for your being willing to do this. Your podcast really captured my attention because of the title to begin with, Very Bad Therapy. And I'm wondering, what was the inspiration for this?
So Carrie and I just had a chance encounter in early 2018. And at the time, we were both towards the beginning of our graduate programs in California. We hadn't met before, and we started talking about what we were learning in school and our passion for the field. And we were both surprised that what seemed like the most important voice about therapy was conspicuously absent, specifically the clients. We had also come across some of your work and the work of your colleagues as well on things like feedback-informed treatment and how to actually get better as a therapist. And that also seemed conspicuously absent in our respective experiences in the field. And so we were comparing notes around what we had read, what we had learned, what we weren't hearing in trainings, in school, and realized that there was a space that seemed absent where people were not necessarily talking about what are our clients' experiences, or even talking to clients about what it's like being in therapy, especially when things go wrong, because all we were exposed to were these old training videos of the masters of certain theoretical orientations doing therapy perfectly. And neither one of us had begun seeing clients yet, but we were pretty sure it wasn't going to be that easy. So we didn't know if this space existed. So we decided to create it where we could talk to people who had had bad experiences in therapy, and then talk with experts or look at research and figure out how can we learn from everybody's mistakes to make our field better, to make ourselves better.
And so why bad therapy, or in your case, very bad therapy? Why not interview clients about very good therapy?
I think that the thing that we were so confused about was, why didn't anyone ever talk about the bad things that happened? We knew people. I mean, we had each had bad therapy experiences. Nothing that like really stood out, when we started talking about it as like bad therapy. But we had friends we knew who had had bad therapy experiences, and we got a lot in graduate school of like, well, don't ever do that because that would be bad. Do this instead because this would be good. This is definitely good. And again, I always have to say this, I love my graduate program, but Ben and I started to feel like we were crazy a little bit. Like nobody was talking about this stuff. And I think that like it was just our own secret voyeurism as like beginning therapists, like wanting to know what the hell a client might be thinking. Like what is their experience of when something goes terribly wrong? What does it look like? Because we get a lot from professors and professionals and saying, don't do this for clients because it's awful. Clients don't like it when you do X, Y, Z. But we just had never actually heard a client say any of that. And we wondered why.
If you focus on very bad therapy, aren't you going to drive clients away from this miraculous activity? Isn't that going to make people not want to go if we're highlighting all the traumatic things? Aren't we hearing enough about these therapists who violate boundaries with phone calls and Facebook, and some who even do worse than that? I mean, aren't you going to keep people out of this process?
I think it's a bit of a fallacy to assume that clients don't know that bad therapy happens. In many cases, they've experienced it if they've been to therapy before and it hasn't been particularly helpful. So by not acknowledging it as the practitioners, it doesn't make it go away. It just means we're not talking about it and we're creating shame. And I think the most insidious part of that is if we pretend like it doesn't happen and it does, then our clients are left to wonder, is it me? Did I do something wrong? Am I too broken for therapy or something along those lines? And I can't tell you how rewarding it's been to get emails from people who have found our podcast and realize that this is something that happens. And sometimes it's a small thing, sometimes it's a big thing, but we present ourselves as a field as the experts, as the culturally sanctioned healers that you go to when you need mental health support. And if it doesn't go well, it makes sense that clients would say, maybe it's me, maybe I did something wrong. And we want people to know on the client end of things that's not the case, that bad therapy happens, and it shouldn't be a source of shame for therapists, because we all do bad therapy at times. It's impossible not to. It's part of the job. We need to learn from it instead of burying it and thinking that it somehow makes us a bad therapist or a bad person.
And as I know, you know, this knowledge about bad therapy goes back almost 50 years now. Alan Bergen, who was Michael Lambert's supervisor, helped him be interested in negative outcomes from treatment. And yet it's really struggled to become a topic in the field. If you Google how to do therapy, 55,000 books. If you Google failures in psychotherapy, you end up literally with a handful published over the same 5-decade period. What are you discovering in your podcast experience and in your experience as clinicians is behind this reticence to discuss our failures?
Defensiveness. Well, 100%. I mean, I feel like over and over it's therapist defensiveness. They so often it seems like therapists really can't. That's the problem with clients. That's what ends up being bad therapy, is when a therapist can't acknowledge that something they've said or done has landed wrong or didn't fit for what the client was hoping for, or just made the client feel awful. And then outside the room, I feel like a lot of therapists they can't sit with the thought that if therapy is not working, it might have something to do with what they're not doing or maybe what they are doing wrong, rather than like, oh, it's the client's resistance to treatment. The client isn't ready for change. They just don't want to start with, maybe I could do something better.
And what errors are you discovering? Are they all on the egregious end and perhaps things we should feel ashamed of? Or what? What have you found in your conversations with clients?
It spans the whole range. So we've heard stories that are certainly egregious, things like an older male therapist engaging in grooming behavior with a younger female client, and things that are beyond unethical. That are
the things that we expected to find, the things that we thought for sure we'll find these stories. Absolutely.
Things that are clear violations of ethics and potentially the law.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's also been interesting because we'll hear stories that Carrie and I will talk to each other and say, I think I've done something like that. Or we'll hear a story where somebody will say, what was really helpful for me was when my therapist challenged me in this certain kind of way. And another guest will come on and say, that was terrible. It made me feel invalidated. It made me feel like not supported at all. And so on one end of the bad therapy spectrum are things that just about anybody can point to and say that that's not okay. And on the other end are things where it really is client specific. And if you as the therapist are not aware that something that your well-intentioned efforts could come across as harmful, you really run the risk of severing a therapeutic relationship, and then clients will leave and you won't know why. So bad therapy can just look like, I think, unaware therapy, where you do something that maybe even came out of a textbook and it just landed wrong with the client and they don't feel empowered in the relationship to say, that was really problematic for me. I think we need to talk about this so we can get back on track.
This is kind of the dilemma of being a therapist. Anything you say can be helpful and harmful because the people that are seeing us are so different and diverse. How are therapists, or what are you discovering in your podcast, supposed to deal with this lack of clear lines within which to color and make the therapy happen?
I mean, I think that it starts with knowing there is no right way to do therapy. I mean, like that's, if that's what you're going into the room trying to do is like, do it right or do it the best, do the best therapy, like it's not going to happen. The best therapy that we've heard of is responsive therapy. And so many times even we hear our guests talk about bad experiences that absolutely could have been salvaged. They tell us exactly how the therapist could have just like saved everything, saved the relationship, that maybe good work had been going on, but something happened and then the client felt unsafe after that. And it's generally as simple as, you know, like, I'm sorry, I recognize what I did was wrong there. So I think that it's openness. And I know, like, this is honestly, our entire show is an advertisement for feedback informed treatment, because it's like, it seems like, and this is why Ben and I thought we were crazy when we first started talking to each other. We couldn't believe this thing was out there and that wasn't just common practice. Like everybody, of course, used it. Like, how could you not? It seemed like this wild, crazy thing that for a trainee to want to like bring a sick ale into the room. They're like, why would you do such a thing? And Ben and I were just like, because how else are you going to find out like if it's working or not?
Are you finding that there are mistakes that are current? In other words, that are the result of changing time and culture. Of course, then there are the old standbys, the one that you've mentioned, the older male therapist grooming the younger female client. These seem like they have existed from the beginning in many ways. But what new, if you're hearing them in your podcast, in your interview with clients, what new airs are on the horizon that all of us could be aware of?
I don't know if we've had stories that speak specifically to the question, but what comes up for me, and this is in, I think this goes back to, we did an episode that just looked at the history of supervision in therapy and how it really doesn't make an impact. And I know, Scott, that's something that you're familiar with in terms of client outcomes. But what we heard in looking back at that research and what we hear presently is you'll have supervisees that are far more current on culture shifts than the supervisors, or students will have more knowledge of how, cultural landscapes are shifting than professors. And I think this feeds into a bigger picture about our field, that if we assume we're the experts and we know things without trying to understand the experience of our clients or the students or the supervisees, we really run the risk of causing harm or being ignorant to things that are very relevant, maybe even in our own lives that we're ignorant of because we're sort of locked in an older way of thinking. So having that awareness about what is shifting culturally is beyond a necessity. I think it's an ethical requirement, because we can't ever just plant our feet in the ground and say, this is how things are. There's a need for openness and curiosity about the experiences of others that doesn't always exist in a profession that likes to think of itself as top-down expertise at times.
Carrie, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, for me, actually, what comes up is the idea of like languaging. I feel like something that I've been aware of, like I've been in conversations with other therapists, white therapists, who have been like in agony, like despairing over having used the wrong term to describe somebody, and kind of despairing about like how, well, I can never get it right. Like I can't ever keep up. And I think that like right now, language is, and terms to use is one of those things that, I mean, we need to, as therapists, like let go of. We are not going to know the right term. And we should, rather than like trying to gird ourselves with the correct vocabulary before we go into the room, I think a better approach would be to recognize, I'm going to find out what words are okay, like for this client. What words does this client like to use? And recognize that like that's a really important place to not get defensive. I think that's something that's shifting a lot.
Yeah. And I suppose then your podcast is designed to help people keep their minds open without shame, admitting that we're always learning.
We hope so. Yeah.
Have you? That's an interesting comment, Carrie. Have you received pushback? Is there pushback?
Yeah, I mean, not a lot, not as much as we thought we were going to get. People told us when we started the show, you are going to get people telling you to shut down and how dare you and this, that, and the other thing. And we really didn't get that. But we have gotten some feedback here and there that we are shaming therapists. And I guess, again, that's a matter of perspective. But my perspective truly is, I don't think it's shameful to make a mistake. I don't think it's shameful to have done something wrong if you're trying to, help a client. I think the shameful thing is not cleaning up the mess you've made.
I've heard lots of, in your podcast, I've heard lots of laughter at what we do, but I really haven't heard tons of poking fun at us. It seems like both of you take the field very seriously and your responsibility very seriously, at least.
Yeah, I think the laughter that at times may be experienced in a dissonant tone to the subject material, I think that's a totally fair criticism. It's just that Carrie and I really enjoy talking with each other, and that's just our natural rapport. Yeah. And neither one of us cares to change that or be anybody other than who we are as human beings. But we don't laugh at therapists. We certainly don't laugh at the client's stories.
I think it's really important that we not, as in this profession, take ourselves too seriously, because I think that it's when we start taking ourselves too seriously that we can't admit mistakes.
Right. Well, and I know from my own experience, and I think the two of you have done such a nice job with the podcast, giving permission to talk about something that everyone knows exists and they feel it. I find therapists as a group, there's always an exception, but as a group, they're a hyper responsible group. They really do want to do right by people. And your podcast, I think, gives them a unique opportunity to admit that what we all know when we go home at the end of the day, I didn't do my best at every hour. I want to thank you both for this opportunity to speak with you, and highly recommend the Very Bad Therapy podcast. There may be people who are listening to this who would like to be interviewed by you for the podcast. And if so, how would they reach you?
You can find us at vbtpodcast@gmail.com. Or our website is verybadtherapy.com. It is brand spanking new, redesigned by Carrie. It looks wonderful, so please check it out. And if you have a story that you want to share with us, or just give us feedback, we'd love to hear any thoughts you have about the show and how we can do better, keep up what we're doing. Of course, we're always open to feedback.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Scott.